All right, cool. We're on air. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Another episode of the WP Crowd. Today's a cool one. As usual, I'm going to start with intros, starting with my left with Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe McGill. I work at Washington University in St. Louis and involved in the responsive images plugin that we just released our merge proposal to core this morning. So.
Awesome. Kate.
I'm Kate Newville. I am a general website consultant in Birmingham, Alabama. I create and build and maintain websites, and I've been working with WordPress since 2004.
Very cool. Morton.
Hi, I'm Morten Wren Hendrickson. I'm a senior staff author with lynda.com at LinkedIn, and I also contribute to WordPress currently through the Image Flow project, and generally have opinions about things that have to do with WordPress and web design.
Yes. All right, Nick.
I'm Nick Adams. I'm the owner of Revolt Media, and I'm a digital nomad, so I'm kind of all over the place.
Sweet. All right. Usually we do a little bit of news here, but I'm just going to skip that today because I don't really know what to talk about anyway. And so a lot of people we're talking about responsive and mobile today, and it kind of came up during some conversations. There were a couple WordCamps this weekend that were pretty big, LA and Tampa, as far as I know. I'm sure there was at least one more that I didn't hear about. But we talk a lot about mobile, and it kind of stops at the point where it's like, well, I use Bootstrap, or well, I use Foundation, and I use some responsive UI framework, and that's all I really need. And I can't say that it's not a good start, but I think people are missing a lot when it comes to what you can be doing to really optimize for mobile users. And one thing that I've actually heard Morton talking about actually at a WordCamp Miami, and something I've never even thought about before, was he was talking about UX for the thumb. And most people are like, well, UX, they'll talk about UX all day to you. But one thing that no one really takes into consideration, especially when you're talking about a website that you know you're going to get mobile visitors that are on their phones and on their devices, what is the interaction like when they only have their thumb to work with? Morton, do you want to touch on that a little bit? Because I know you talked a lot about it at Miami, and so what are some of the things that people can do to, I guess, better their UX for people on small devices?
I think the main thing is to remember that the majority of people who visit your site now will be visiting it using a mobile device of some kind. And the sites that we build and the tools that we build into them were never designed to interact with mobile devices at all. The design patterns that have established what is proper web design have always been based on one of these and a gigantic piece of glass right in front of your face. This thing, although everyone says they're doing mobile-first design, is not the first thing people think of. So, for instance, one of the famous examples is, I can't remember his name right now, but a guy earlier this year, he posted a pain map where he just showed when you're holding your mobile device, how difficult it is to reach to different areas of your phone with the thumb. And one of the things that became very clear is that as our phones are getting larger, the primary location where menu buttons is positioned gets farther and farther away from easy reach. For example, on my phone, this is a Sony Xperia X3, so it's not as big as that Fruit phone that's like gigantic. And I have very large hands, and reaching the top corner is almost impossible, especially with one hand. And that's where everyone puts their menu button. That's just a simple example of what's happening. And the funny thing is, when you look at the reasons why people put the menu button there, it has nothing to do with anything other than app convention, because it harks back to the original roots of web design, where you would put a menu on the left-hand side of your screen, and it would usually be within its own frame, and then you would be able to navigate through these other pages. But that design pattern is long, long gone, and no one's doing that anymore. And yet we've gotten used to this idea that the menu must be in the top left-hand corner because that's where everything happens. People start reading from that location. But when you look at apps, so any kind of app you use, I'm pretty sure you'll notice that all the interactive features within the app will always be positioned on the bottom lower third of the phone, because that's where everything happens. If I go into Instagram, everything is happening down here. If I go into Facebook and you start typing, your keyboard is down here. Everything is always on the bottom because that's where you want to reach. So what I'm seeing now is that some websites have started splitting the screen. So you have low interaction areas up here. So that's types of interaction that you would rarely do, things like going back to the home page. Whereas all the stuff that the site owner actually wants you to do, maybe that is share on social media, or it could be favorite a post, or it could be leave a comment, or anything is placed on the bottom where it's within easy reach. And doing so is not hard. It's just that it's a completely different way of thinking about the design process. And I think moving forward, we'll see more of that, but right now, it's still something that's fairly rare.
I think you don't see it too much in websites. People don't take into consideration, because I know from a very long time ago when I first started looking at UX, there's a famous heat map overlay of websites where it's a big F-looking thing, where it's top left over down a little bit, then over a little bit, then continue going down on the left side, and that may work well for a laptop or even a desktop or something like that, but I don't think people have ever looked at that and said, well, this just doesn't work for mobile devices.
Yeah, definitely it's not.
And websites are, I think, starting to get there. I think apps, like native apps, have been there for a little bit longer, and I'm almost curious if it's better to follow in their footsteps. Look at Facebook's app, see how they're changing things for UX, and then maybe that's how you should change your website, or if it's if websites should take the lead, because maybe I don't know what's visited more. I'm not sure if more people visit websites versus apps on their phone, but one or the other should take the lead and be like, okay, let's follow the UX of people, especially of high visibility websites and apps.
Well, I've made an experiment. So let's see. Let me just share my screen here very quickly so you can see. This is just me being a bragger. So this is a new theme that I just released, or that I am going to release later today, but I just put it up on my site to test it. And you'll notice it has a standard menu up here, but if I reduce the screen width, the menu drops down to the bottom corner here and opens like this. And it'll hide and show depending on interaction, but it always stays at the top no matter what. And this is a opinionated experiment, is what I'm calling it right now, because it remains to be seen if people will actually like this type of interaction or not, but I haven't seen it before, and I need to get it tested in the real world to make sure either that it works or that it doesn't work, so that we can see if this is a usable interaction pattern. Because the only thing that I've left at the top of the screen here is the home button in the top left-hand corner, because that's the thing that no one ever touches anymore. There's been some interesting research that shows the home button has become so irrelevant that people are talking about just removing it. I've even seen conversations about that within WordPress, that the default that the menu always starts with a home button should be removed. Well,
I don't want to get too far into it, but I noticed that you use the word menu versus a more appealing and widely used icon for the menu.
More appealing and less understood. Yes.
Yes, the hamburger icon seems to be dying. And
that's good if that's true. Although I have yet to see it. I think I guess on that, the hamburger icon was a crutch in very real sense, that everyone was looking for a simple way of putting a menu in place without having to put the word menu or navigation or anything else, because it takes up a lot of space. And everyone was thinking about cramming as much as possible at the top of their screen. And the only way of cramming something big into the top of the screen is to put a tiny little icon, this shelf icon or a absolute equals icon or whatever you want to call it. The triple bar became the default, even though all the research that's been done on this shows quite unequivocally that no one understands what that is. And there are even fantastic examples of icons that, or the hamburger looks exactly like the logo of the company, or it looks exactly like a scroll bar, or it looks exactly like other things. So I sure hope you're right that people stop using it, because it really is a terrible, terrible decision. And it does not communicate at all. But, you know, enough about me ranting.
Yeah.
I want to hear other people's opinions.
So Joe's here, and Joe, the reason I wanted to have you on was one thing that people don't take into consideration. I know we looked at Morton's example really quick, and his images beautifully went from full width down, and then eventually continued on the responsive path.
Right.
But no one ever thinks, well, when you have a responsive image and you're trying to make sure that everyone has a beautiful experience, you're loading, and half the time you're loading the image for the desktop experience.
Right.
And you're saying desktop view, and then let's go down from there. And so responsive images have been kind of a thing for a little bit now, although I don't think too many people know about it yet, especially people just getting into development, or people who just, or maybe people don't know code at all and build WordPress sites from their admin panel. Want to talk a little bit about what a responsive image is and what your project is doing?
Sure. Well, what you said to start out is absolutely true. I think as we have seen a gigantic uptick in these high-density displays, larger displays, and we're trying to do. I mean, we like images. We're visual creatures. I don't know that there's a way that you can get around the fact that people respond better to images than words, generally speaking. And so you see a lot of sites creating these big, giant images into their sites so that they look great on these like high-density, huge screens. But that has come at a cost of every device, whether you're on a slower network, if you're on an older, smaller device. I mean, anything that doesn't need all of that extra file size. Like, those folks are still having to download these gigantic images, and that's a problem. We just saw earlier this year the average website or average web page grow above 2 megabytes, which is just crazy. Like that we're now 2 megabytes is the average page view. And so responsive images really was an effort that was started several years ago by a bunch of people, really smart developers that sort of collaborated under the banner of this responsive images community group to add some tools to the HTML sort of tool book, or tool belt, if you will, that allows us to basically tell the browser that we have several different types of images that we want to display in different contexts, so that users don't have to be penalized, and we can still, have these really nice, crisp, big images when it's appropriate to have them. And so we could go on and on about the spec and what all is involved in that. One of the best ways to learn about all of the details is a great set of tutorials that Jason Grigsby wrote earlier this year on his Cloud4 blog. Goes into a lot of details, and it's really, really outstanding. I can't recommend it highly enough. What we have decided to do in WordPress is to take one subset of those new tools, which is 2 new attributes that you can put on image tags, basically. One that's called source set or SRC set, depending on who you ask, which is basically an attribute you list several different versions of an image, several different files that are basically different sizes of the same image. And then a sizes attribute that tells the browser a little bit of information about the intended layout of that image. And it uses something very similar to media queries syntax that allows browsers to, before the page is rendered, it allows browsers to know, okay, what size is this image supposed to be, and which image version would be most appropriate for this device, and will download the more appropriate smaller image when possible, and the big large image when that's appropriate. And so we're trying to bake that into WordPress by default.
Very cool. And then how does it work with sorry, we kind of talked about this in the pre-show, but how does it work with themes that have different layouts for their content, and how's it going to affect theme developers specifically?
Right. So what we've done by default is created what we think is sort of a smart sort of first step, which is for people who don't really understand, which I would assume most people don't, because this is fairly new, how source set and sizes work. Source set, like I said, is the list of all of the different image sizes that you have available, and just to note that it's probably a lot of people are probably familiar or have heard of the picture element, which is another one of the HTML elements that were added as a part of this responsive images spec. And that element allows you to do some really neat things with art direction, which is let's say I have an image that on a really wide screen I want to show like a big, like short wide version, but on a smaller screen I want to show just like a little square, and I want to zoom in. It's not just the same aspect ratio shrunk down. It's actually different images. That is a different use case what we're handling in WordPress right now. What we're trying to handle is just, it's the exact same image, but it's, several different versions. So think of it in terms of when you upload an image to WordPress, it automatically creates the medium and the large size for you, and any other intermediate sizes. That's sort of actually the basis of what we're doing, is we're taking all of those image sizes and telling the browser, we have all of these image sizes available, and letting the browser choose which one makes the most sense depending on your layout. And we allow the browser to know a little bit more about the layout through that sizes attribute. By default, if you do not include a sizes attribute, the browser will assume that the image is supposed to take up the entire viewport, the entire screen, which is hardly ever the case if you think about like an image that's inside of your blog post. Generally we're talking much smaller than the entire screen, and so to tell a browser that a screen that should be, or an image that should be 300 pixels wide is actually the full viewport would be detrimental a lot of times. So what we've done is create a smart default, we think, which is that anytime the viewport is wider than the image size that you intended, we use the image size as sort of the max width, the layout width. But those values are filterable by theme authors. So anybody that gets this turned on by default, should see some performance gains. But folks who want to tweak it a little bit further and really narrow in on the specifics, they would have the opportunity to do that as well, and that would be kind of our recommended approach for themes.
So I can specify as a theme developer, specify which actual image I want loaded based on screen size.
Well, you would be able to choose which image you want loaded, but you would be able, not through this markup pattern. That would be something where you would use a picture element with several sources.
Sorry, not image, not the actual image, but the The image size.
Yes. So you can basically tell the browser what your intended layout size is at different breakpoints. So let's say, for example, you have an image that the widest view is in 3 columns, right? And it's a box with 3 columns. As it shrinks down, maybe it goes to 2 columns, and the images actually get wider. And then at the smallest width, it just stacks. And then down at the smallest width, it's a little small image. You can filter that sizes attribute in order to tell the browser sort of the intended layout, because one of the issues that responsive images ran into early on in the process is that one of the big performance gains that browsers has made over the last several years is this idea of a prefetcher. And what a prefetcher does is it, as soon as the page is being downloaded, as soon as it's reading the markup and it comes across an image asset, before it knows anything about the layout, it's not fully finished downloading the HTML. Before it has rendered the layout and knows anything about the layout, it goes ahead and grabs those image files so that they're ready a little bit sooner. The problem is that from a responsive images standpoint, now which image you choose should be somewhat dependent on the layout. So the sizes attribute allows us to tell the browser something about the intended layout before the page is rendered. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
it totally makes sense.
Question, Joe.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that in this case, there are, let's say we've got 5 sizes for 5 different breakpoints.
Sure.
And you're on your mobile and you don't want to download that 2 megabyte full width huge image. So
Yeah.
this prefetch just tells the browser, okay, I'm on mobile, bring me back the little bitty one that goes into this full column here, correct?
Correct. Yeah. The prefetcher is something that sort of predates responsive images. So right now, the prefetcher will just grab whatever is in the source attribute, which is, up until the past year has always been like when you do an image, there's one attribute that tells what the file is and where it lives, and so browsers could just go grab that as soon as it sees that there's one there. With responsive images, we don't necessarily always want the browser to grab the one that's in that source attribute, and so we use the source set attribute to list all of the available options for the browser, and the sizes attribute to tell the browser what the layout's going to be before the page is actually rendered.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Yeah. It takes a bit to get your head around the concept, but once it clicks, for me at least, once it clicks, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah, what I found that I like about that is it kind of bridges that gap between responsive design and adaptive design that I think people are really looking for a long time.
Yeah, and it's, it can be used in a lot of different ways in a lot of different contexts. So whether you're doing the mobile first sort of development or you're doing desktop first or whatever, it doesn't really prescribe, how you handle those image assets, as much as it just gives you some tools to let the browser know what it has available, what you have available on the server. In the WordPress context, we've been making multiple crops of images, images that you upload forever. And so why not make use of that? We've got those sitting on the server already. So it just sort of made sense to do it that way.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, with these responsive images, when you're using the right image for the screen size, usually it's going to be a smaller image as far as file size goes. So your website's just going to load faster for anyone, especially if someone's on their mobile network as opposed to, let's say, Wi-Fi. If they're on a 3G or even 4G at times, can be kind of laggy if you have these huge images loading. And this is really going to help performance just from a usability point of view. So from just someone being able to click on your website and have it load quick enough, this is really going to help out with that as well. It's not just a design, make my website look pretty thing. There's actually some functional spec to this whole thing.
Right, and that's one of the goals. And I think one of the things that we, even in some some client work that I've done, or some work that I've done where I've seen people who, they're not web experts. They're just trying to, write, and get their content out there. I oftentimes see people who, will embed the full-size image in their post, and didn't realize that image was, 2 megabytes. And this is even a safeguard against those sorts of cases, because now the browser is going to choose, the 1024 pixel width image instead, perhaps if it's more appropriate, and save a lot of bandwidth. I think there's still a lot more that we can do to maybe tweak this further, and I'm excited to see kind of what comes next. I also would mention that this is still fairly new technology, so browsers are just starting to implement this source set and sizes and some of these responsive tools in the browser, and I see coming in the future ways for users on their devices to choose sort of their user settings, their preferences, that they only want the smallest size when available because they want a faster experience, or where the browser knows a little bit more about your network performance and can choose, even if on a big screen, it could choose perhaps a smaller image asset because it wants to save you some bytes and some time because your network is not ideal. Like those sorts of things that aren't here yet, but I think are coming within the next couple of years. So I mean, we'll see this continue to improve, I think, which is exciting.
Now, Joe, the major criticism of the responsive images spec has always been that this goes against the premise of markup for markup and styling for style. And this the sizes attribute has been the big issue, because in the sizes attribute, you actually have to put in presentational content. You have to say under certain circumstances where the content is 50 Ms, then use this image, otherwise use something else. And that becomes especially challenging when we're talking about WordPress, where someone could swap out their theme. So I played around with an earlier version of the plugin. I haven't checked the latest one, but in the earlier version, when you inserted an image into a post, you got a bunch of markup inserted into the post. And if you then later wanted to change that, you had to go in and take that information out and then put new information in. So how's that being handled now, and how's that going to be handled going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that we thought a lot about, and with the last couple of weeks have actually switched to a different implementation that adds those attributes on display through a display filter, rather than embedding that markup directly into the posts. And it's some of those exact concerns is really what tipped us in that direction. The other thing that you got to keep in mind whenever you try to do any sort of display filter is, there are some performance penalty to running extra PHP code, on the server whenever the site's being rendered. And so we've been working to really make sure that filter performs well. We think that we're pretty close. We're still working on improving it. So anybody who is performance-minded and wants to get involved, please. But the performance, some of the performance penalty that comes from making pages render maybe a little bit slower in order to do that at runtime, I think is offset by the performance gains that are made by downloading smaller images for the most part, and then also just being a little more future friendly as people change their themes, or spec becomes more mature, and we come up with a better way of handling these things. And so let's not have that mark sitting in our databases forever.
That's what I like to hear.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited for it to come into core. I've been looking, as I said, I've been looking at it for a little while. I've talked to a couple people, ever since a little before Miami, WordCamp Miami really got me thinking about it. between Matt's talk and Morton's talk, thinking about how we look at mobile devices and not thinking them as a smaller version of a desktop, but a completely separate device, I think is important. I think if you think of it as just a smaller desktop, then you're bound to not succeed in having good UX. But you have to think of it as a completely different computer or a different something completely different than your desktop experience. It's like apples to oranges, and I've had this conversation before: responsive versus a mobile website. And in some old thinking, you used to have like your mobile dot whatever domain.com, and yes, you used to route mobile devices to it, but you had a lot of power at that point. You had a lot of power to say, all right, only on the mobile will we load these smaller images. Only on the mobile will the layout be this way. And yes, we've come a long way of making this all responsive and everything, but it was really a better way of saying, let's create a separate experience for the mobile 100% from the get-go. From the ground up, we are starting from scratch as a separate UX, and we've kind of lost that with the responsive world that's come into play with CSS3 and all these UI frameworks. And I'm hoping we kind of bridge the gap and put those two together, because you really do need two separate experiences if you want to have a successful mobile website. And so this plugin coming into Core is going to be a really good thing. Remember, design for the thumb. It's always going to be better off. And that's it. Are there any other closing remarks? We are just about out of time here.
Just one last thing, Joe. If people are developing themes right now and they see, oh, well, this is coming into Core ostensibly in 4.4, and they want to prepare their theme for it. As if I remember correctly, currently the functions that you have the prefix tevco on them, or something like that. What is the actual function names going to look like once it gets baked into Core? Do you know that yet?
I mean, it won't be set in stone until a patch is actually in Core. So I mean, it would probably be a little too early to say for sure. I mean, I assume that they'll probably have like a WP prefix and be similar to what we've got now. But yeah, that's something that you would need to keep in mind. If you want to test out, some of the base functionality at this point, you can install the plugin RICG responsive images. It's in the WordPress org repository, and that can give you a good starting point to at least have your themes sort of ready to go, and to be able to give us feedback, from now until it comes out, whether it's in 4.4 in December or whether it gets bumped to a later release. Feedback from theme developers is really, really helpful.
So you're going to come join our image flow team now that this thing is done?
Man, I'm into it. You guys are doing great work.
If anyone does want to get involved with the responsive image, check out WP Crowd, our website. We're going to put some links up. They are on Slack as well. And I would highly recommend trying to get all your bug fixes in before it goes into Core, because that is, if I've learned anything from the API project, it is best to do it before it goes into Core, or else it's just going to be a pain in the butt. So thank you all for joining us. Till next week. See you guys later.